welcome to this special introduction to the Writing the Story Within mentorship program and the Story Garden initiative. My name is Chip Richards, and I'm the host of this dynamic journey into the realms of story. And I look forward to taking just a few minutes to share with you a little bit about the program, and more importantly, to give you a glimpse into the story seeds that may be waiting within you, ready to come out onto the page where they can be shared in your own experience and with the world around you. The purpose of this short video exercise is to really share with you a sort of inside-out approach that I've developed in my own writing path as a way for me to center myself when I'm in the trees and in the forest of a story experience, as a way of sort of providing a rudder for my journey so that I always know when and if I'm on track, and if I'm not, I feel it and I can quickly navigate back to where I need to be to most powerfully deliver the story that I came to share. There are certainly a lot of technical tools that allow us to hone the focus and the structure of our story, but that's not really the purpose of this session here. The purpose of our session here is really just to help us focus the energetic essence of our story, so that when we start to apply some of those more technical structural elements, they are being applied within a container that is very purely connected to our heart's desire for the story that we want to share. So if you've explored or experienced yourself as a writer in any way, you'll know that when you have that initial spark or idea for a story or an idea of something you want to write, oftentimes as soon as you bring your pen to the page and you start writing, it seems to change, it seems to evolve, it seems to kind of start to grow and develop into sometimes something totally different than what you began. And there are schools of thought that say a few different things about that. How to manage this initial impulse with this sort of organic growing nature of story. And my tendency and my aim in the work that I do is to try to find this sort of middle road between, where I can both be open to the sort of wild and emerging impulses that come as soon as that pen hits the page and starts to move. It's like giving birth to an energy. It's like that story spark suddenly goes into a flame and you go, whoa, this flame could easily get out of control, and you're suddenly having ideas in all sorts of different directions, and you may feel yourself wandering off in a direction that was totally unanticipated, but for whatever reason feels right to you. And it's hard to know in those junctures whether you honor that sort of diversion or whether you stick with the plan of the story that you wanted to tell. And the real key, in my experience, is to find that balance between honoring the clear essence of the story that you want to tell, and also being open to the muse, being open to the creative currents that are often moving through you in ways that we don't always know in the moment. But when that energy is clear and good and flowing, and when we are connected to the pulse of our story, it unfolds in ways that we often couldn't have imagined. And in so doing, reveals to us a story that we mightn't have been able to think up in our mind, but in the end, which really serves the purpose of why we're telling this story in the first place. So one of my strategies for staying centered as I move through the different phases and different layers of my story is to initiate my story writing experience by really creating a strong sense of true north, a strong heart center for my story, so that I know no matter what the details of the story are, I am very clear about the feeling essence of the story. I know the energy that my story is going to be conveying. And there's a few different questions that I often ask myself to actually help myself get very clear. And because what I find is that when I'm clear energetically, emotionally about the sort of emotional truth of my story, the sort of heart of the matter of my story, then I find that the details have a way of coming through my subconscious to serve that clarity. If I don't know what I'm trying to say, if I don't know the sort of heart essence of my story, then I'll get all sorts of impulses, and some of them are good, some of them aren't so good, and it's hard to sort of differentiate or discern between the two. So the first question that I often ask myself is, well, how do I want to feel when I'm writing this story? And how do I want to feel when I read this story at the end? When I come to the end of the story and I've looked at it and it's in its completed form, and I read it and I follow the journey of that story that I've written, how do I want to feel? How do I want that to make me feel? What feelings and emotions and kind of truths within myself do I want that to activate? And when I get a sense for that within myself, I ask the same thing. I get sort of what I might call the audience perspective. I ask, well, when someone comes away from watching this movie or comes away from reading this story or this book, how do I want them to feel? What is the feeling that I want people to walk away from my story holding within them? If I was going to crack open a new feeling nature within someone, what would that be? What's the feeling within the story that I want to convey? Of all the words and all the ins and outs of the story, when the story is complete and the reading or the viewing has done, how do people feel when they come out? And certainly that question is going to be answered differently for everyone, and so you can't always peg it, but it's an interesting thing just to clarify our intention. How do we want to feel on a personal level, and how do we want other people to feel when they leave from this experience? And thirdly, I sort of like to get this sort of what I call the coffee shop perspective. If it was a group of people that came and watched my film or read my book and then gathered around a table to talk about it, I like to ask, what kind of thoughts did this story provoke in people? What kind of discussions are going to emerge from the experience of this story? And what kind of questions might this story ask that actually cause people to ask those similar questions of their own life? What are the questions that this story pose to the viewer, to the audience member, and even to myself as I'm writing it? That's my sort of coffee table perspective. Then the fourth area is what I might call the intimate perspective, and that is what I've come to recognize is that story, when we tell a truthful, authentic story has a way of sort of tapping into universal truth within all people. So if we tell a story that's very intimate for us, it naturally taps into that intimate nature within the viewer or the reader. And in so doing, it becomes kind of a universal space to share energy and ideas. And so when I think about the takeaways for people who are reading and watching my stories, what I like to consider is, through the sharing of my story, what stories might it open up, or might it evoke, or might it reflect upon in other people's lives? How do I want my story to be a catalyst for people to explore the stories of their own experience? And then lastly, through that doorway, if I were to focus all these questions into one real question, I might get what I call my universal perspective. And that is when I ask the question, if there was one message, or one idea, or one truth that I could convey with absolute clarity by the end of this story, what would that be? If your story may have messages and truths written and woven through the whole thing, as many wonderful stories do, but in the end, if there was only one story, truth, or message that I could share with my story, what would that be? And you find that if you get this, the sort of universal perspective, then oftentimes all these other questions answer themselves. And oftentimes the other messages and lessons and truths that want to come through your story have a way of coming through and sort of hanging off that central truth. So that's my glimpse into the writing the story within experience. And my intention and my hope is that you'll take some time to sit with your own story intentions today, and that I hope that through walking through these different perspectives and questions for yourself, by answering them, you've got a more clear understanding of the heart center and true north of your own story. I look forward to sharing with you more in future episodes of the Story Garden Initiative, and to welcoming you into the circle of the Writing the Story Within mentorship program. Thanks for listening.